Hi there. In the last video, we saw how to create high-quality ray tracing using the Arnold viewport renderer. In this video, I'm going to show you how to do some more sophisticated lighting by changing the materials of objects, which will give them a much more realistic appearance. So whereas the last video focused on light sources, in this video, we're going to focus on material surfaces and how to modify materials. In Maya, materials are added by using what's called the hypershade. We open the hypershade by going to Windows, Rendering Editors, Hypershade. It will start off as a large display, and I actually like to have it off in the corner so I can see what my model looks like as I'm working, and that will allow me to continue to do high quality rendering while I'm actually creating surface materials. So let's select the model. And the first thing we want to do is apply a new material to it. So to do that, we go into the hypershade and we say Create, Materials, Phong. And this is kind of a standard model for creating reflective surfaces. And I click on the Phong. Now it doesn't apply it to my object right away, unfortunately. So I need to tell it that I'm going to apply that. So I also want to keep track of my materials so I don't get confused. So I'm going to click on the Phong and then change the name of this to car, just so I know that that's the material I'm using for the car. So although I've created this material, I've not yet linked it to the car model. To do that, it's a little more complicated than it should be, but here's how you do this. What you do is you select the surface of the car, and now I'm going to, without clicking anywhere else, so be careful not to click somewhere else, I'm going to right-click on the car material and then go up to this Assign Material to Selection, which is just above it. It'll be the text that appears just above it. So I right-click on that and I do Assign Material to Selection. Now it has been assigned, but I don't see it because of the selection, so now I need to also click somewhere else. I'll just click somewhere in the outliner and I'll see that it actually has been applied. A different material has been applied. And I can go and change that car color, and we'll see that it actually is changing the surface of the car to match which color I'm choosing. So if I wanted the car color to be a little more blue, I can just choose the color here and set that color to something that might be more blue, for example. So that's how we assign a color. We'll get into some of the other material properties, but let's start by thinking about how we'd apply a different material to different surfaces, because we'd actually like each surface to have a kind of different appearance to it. Like glass looks like glass. The car will look like metal or plastic, painted metal. The ground might be concrete. So how can we go about this? Let's do the wheels, for example. In this model, I'm fortunate that my model actually comes in different parts so that I can assign different materials to different pieces of the model. That is only possible because it's not all one mesh. There are actually a few different surfaces, and so I can modify them separately. So how would we create a separate material just for the wheels, which are going to be black for that color? We would do that as follows. First, I'm going to create a new material. So I'll go to Create, Materials, Phong. Now we'll create a new material. Now I'm going to quickly remember that in order to really make this useful, I'm going to change the name of it immediately to something rememberable, and I'm going to change this to wheels, just so I know that this is the material I'm using for the wheels. And I just modify that here in the name panel here. Now I have car and wheels as separate, and I know that. So now I want to assign this. Again, what I do is I select the pieces that I want to be this color. So I'm doing the front wheel and the back wheel, and it selects some other stuff, but I'm not going to worry about that for now. So without clicking anywhere else, I go to the hypershade. I right-click and then I do Assign Material to Selection. Now I won't see it because of the selection, so I have to click somewhere else. And now I should be able to modify the material, and it should just modify that one material. So what's happening here? It looks like something else is being modified. So first I'm going to make sure that I'm modifying the wheels. And if I change the color, there we go, I didn't have the right material selected. So in there I'm modifying the wheels and making them black, and that looks quite a bit more realistic by making those surfaces black. The last one I want to change here is potentially the ground. So maybe I want the ground to be a different color or texture. So I'm gonna choose the ground. And again, I'm going to create a new material. So I'll go to Create, Materials, thong. And now I have another material, and this one I want to be the ground, so I'm just going to call this, concrete actually, because this is what I'm going to use for the concrete material. And now I want to assign this again. So just to be sure that I'm doing this, that I've got the right one, maybe I'll change the color even earlier so I can tell that I'm using the right material. So I'm going to select the surface. This time I'm going to select the ground. Now I'm going to right click on concrete, and I'm going to say assign material to selection. Now see that it assigns that surface. So this is looking pretty good. You can see with Arnold Render enabled, it looks quite realistic. Things are looking pretty nice. So at this point, I think it's a good chance to save it. Remember to save often. And now I'm ready to kind of look at the next phase. As I mentioned, I was going to make the ground concrete. This looks pretty cool because it looks more like it's on glass. But how would I make this look more like a specific material like concrete? So we're going to get into how to modify materials to make them a little bit more realistic. Okay, so how would I make this surface look a little bit more like concrete? Let's look at how we modify the materials to make something more realistic. I'm going to shift my model over. I can easily move around and navigate around this. I'm going to shift my model over a little just so I can have a better control over the hypershade. I'm going to open this up a little bit, and I'm going to open up this panel on the bottom right, which gives me more control over the material. First, I want to make sure I have the right one selected. I'm going to select concrete here, and that's the one I'm going to work on. The first thing I notice is that concrete is not reflective. So if we go under specular shading, if we recall from before, specular shading refers to the reflectivity of a surface. If I make something 100% reflective, it's going to look almost like a mirror. So this will make the surface almost like a mirror if I turn up the reflectivity. And you can see that it reflects the car kind of almost perfectly and will converge towards a reflection. If I want something to look more like concrete, I'm going to want to dial the reflectivity back down and have it be essentially not reflective. In fact, concrete is not reflective at all. It's so rough that it just does not reflect surfaces unless there's like water on it. So I'm going to turn the reflectivity down. You see there's still these speckles here, and that's because I need to turn the cosine power down to 0 as well. And now this is going to look more like a matte surface, but it still doesn't quite look like concrete. And there's a couple reasons for that. So the first is that concrete is not colored. It's usually gray. And so I will come in here and make the color very gray. So that's the first step. And the other thing is we can see that even though I've turned off specular, that is kind of like reflection, it still feels like it's quite smooth because there's no kind of texture or bump to it. And concrete is very porous. It has a lot of little holes and bumps in it. So in order to get that feeling, I'm going to have to add a texture to it. In order to get some kind of feeling of concrete, I'm going to have to add some kind of texture that makes it feel like concrete. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, on this color thing, I don't want the color to be the constant, just flat gray everywhere. I want it to vary a lot. So I'm going to click on this little icon that gives me control, allows me to add a texture or an image to the color. Each of these will have different set of parameters, but a very simple way to get started is just to do it from a file. So I'm going to choose File, and it starts off with nothing, and I have to pick the file. I'm going to click on the folder so I can locate the file. And so what I've done here is I just went online, and I just did a search for concrete texture just to find something I might use. I found this. I'm going to right-click on it and do Save Image As, and then I'm going to just save this as concrete texture. Find some place to save it and save that concrete texture. So now I have that. I'm going to go back to Maya, and I'm going to find that file, figure out where I put that file, and there I have a concrete texture that I've gotten from online somewhere. As soon as I load that in, it will modify the surface so it looks more like something. Now, I haven't touched the car yet. I'm really just worrying about this very large plane, and I need to change the UVs for it. So if you're working on a ground surface, it's suitable to be doing this, but if you're working on a specific model, you might not want to be changing the UVs. So on the ground surface, I'm going to go to UV, and I'm going to go to planar, and as soon as I click it the first time, you'll see I get these streaks, which means that it did it along the wrong axis. It didn't project it along the correct direction. So I'm going to go back to the plane again, and I'm going to go to UV, This time I click the little box next to planar, and I'm going to say that I want the concrete to come down on the y-axis. So concrete should be projected like an image along the y-axis so that it appears on the surface instead of from the side. And I see this kind of cyan thing appear, and that is called a projection manipulator. The projection manipulator controls the application of a texture here. I'm going to zoom out so I can see what's happening. And I can see that there's these controls here that I can move around. Those are projection manipulator handles. If I grab this corner, as I drag this in, you'll see that I'm actually changing how the texture is applied to the surface and not the size of the object. So I can come in and I can modify the scale of the texture relative to the model. And that changes how the texture is applied to the surface. When I scale it down, it looks a lot more like concrete. And before it looked like just big blobs because it was too large. By scaling the texture down to a reasonable size using this manipulator, I can get something that really starts to look like concrete. So I'm going to deselect everything, go back to object mode. If you see it start to select things like that, just right click and go to object mode. And now I can see that I get something that looks much more like concrete. For now, I'm not going to worry about this seam. That's something else is going on there. And you see it starts to look quite a bit more like concrete. It still looks too reflective, and so I need to think about how I can improve that. As I mentioned, concrete is very rough and not reflective at all. So to look right, it really should not have any kind of reflection to it. I'm going to look and see if there's anything else here I can change that will make this reflection go away, because this reflection is not realistic for concrete. It might be for granite if this was granite, but I really want it to look rough. So I'm going to go to this, look around, and transparency, that's not it. But I find that the specular color, that does get rid of it. So if I turn the specular color down, now it really starts to look like there's no reflections happening, which is what I want. So everything having to do with reflection is in the specular shading. And if I have a material that is not reflective at all, then I'm going to turn off everything here in specular shading and just set that all very low. So it will look like a flat surface, a really rough surface like concrete. Let's come back and work on the car model itself. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to look more closely at the car. And I'm going to think a little bit about how this should be modified to make it look more realistic, more like a realistic car surface. I'm going to select the surface, and I know that I have this as the car texture that I'm using for that. And I can see that by just changing the color of it. Now I think about, for a second, what are the different things that go into making a car look like this? Well, one, we know that it has a paint color, and so that is color I have selected here. And I'm going to make this maybe a more intense blue so that I can really see that it is this blue color. But there's another aspect too, and that is, unlike the concrete, the car is very reflective. A car is painted a shiny color. They add a gloss to it, so you get a very reflective surface in a car. So we're going to in this one, we're going to instead turn up the reflectivity and make this a much more reflective surface. You can see that we already start to see those kind of reflections in the side, which is what we would expect from a car. The other thing I can do is change how smooth it appears by changing what's called the cosine power. Plastic has a kind of low specular power, whereas if I want something to look like metal, I will increase this number by quite a lot, maybe past 100, and then it will look like it's very reflective. And that's kind of what I want for this. You can see that creates much sharper reflections, and those types of reflections are what I would typically see when looking at a car. Let's see if I make the light this a little bit brighter. That's starting to look pretty good. If I zoom out here a little bit and just take a look at this, I'm starting to get something that actually looks pretty nice. So keep in mind too that as you do lighting, as you modify materials, it's important to come back and also move your lights around and experiment with your lights, because that will help you have a better sense of if the material is really working. So be sure that you move your light sources around and experiment with your lights, and it'll give you some inspiration for creating nicer renders and more interesting renderings that are not so expected. There's lots of really other cool things. We've only touched on 2 different types of materials. I've only talked a little bit about concrete and about like high reflective materials. There's lots of other things that you can do with materials, and they can get really quite complex because materials are complicated. I'm not going to go into a lot of other stuff here, but I just wanted to show you a few other additional things that you can do. If I go and select the car again, let's take a look at some other things. Right now, my window is a part of the model, so I can't change the window glass separately. But if I change the transparency, then the model will actually start to look like it's clear, and this is how I would start moving towards doing glass, something like glass. If the windshield were a separate object, then I could modify the windshield material and make it more like glass, and that would change things quite a bit. And that would allow me to make something that really looks like it's transparent, like glass is. I can also change incandescence, and that refers to how much something glows in the dark. So that is, incandescence means it gives off its own light, something that gives off its own light. And so incandescence is very interesting because it makes things that really look like they glow in the dark. There's really quite a lot you can do with ray tracing, with materials, just by experimenting with them. If I was going to make something that was incandescent, I would probably return down the reflectivity because things that are glow in the dark are not very reflective. So this makes it kind of glow even more. And you can see how that casts light from the object, like that actual light, that object actually glows to things around it. So just some other interesting cool things you can do here. And keep in mind, you can also apply textures too. So if you've already painted your model, you can apply other paintings to it, and those should appear here as color. Okay, so I've shown you quite a lot that you can do with materials here. Just as an introduction, we've not gotten into too much detail on materials, but I've shown a bit that you can do with applying different types of files to as a material, to playing with diffuse materials that have no reflection, like concrete, versus specular materials that have a lot of reflection. There's one last thing I'll leave you with this, is that right now it looks like this car is kind of in a night scene with maybe an overhead light with like a street light or something, and it's very dark around it. How would we make this look like it was daytime? Well, the first thing we notice is that I have a ground plane, but I have no sky. There's no background here and no sky illumination that would make me feel like it's daytime out. So the first thing I need to do is to have a background. There's many different ways to do that. The way I tend to like to do that is to create a very large sphere that represents the sky. So what I'm going to do is go to polygonal modeling. Then I'm going to create a sphere, and it starts out very small. So for now I'm going to close the hypershade. I can always come back to it, but I'm going to try and make this sphere first. And again, I want to, like I did with the ground, I'm going to scale this up. Now it's going to immediately cover everything, and I'll probably want to go back to viewport render and turn off Arnold for a second. So I'm just going to stop Arnold and just keep scaling the sky up until I get something that kind of surrounds the whole world and to represent the sky. And now I'm going to go inside, and I can see that I have this kind of background. Now I need to create a sky, and that is itself going to be a material as well. So what I will do is I'll go to Window, I'll go back to the hypershade and load the hypershade. So I have the hypershade opener again. I'm going to create a new material. It can be any type of material. I'm just going to do fog again because that's easy to work with. And I'm going to change this to sky, so I know that I'm working with a sky. Again, I have to apply the material, so I'm going to select the object, and I'm going to right-click on sky and say Assign Material to Selection. And it doesn't change. I have to remember to go back to my Arnold Render. This is a viewport render, so I'm not seeing everything I want here. And I'm going to click play again to get the viewport render. I can see that it's bringing in something here. Now those might look like stars. They're not actually stars. It's a reflection of the ground. And that's kind of strange. So a few things I need to do. First, the sky has no specular shading, so I'm going to turn down specular on everything. But there is an incandescence, so I can set this by changing the sky color to some incandescent blue, some very light blue color. And that will create a kind of like glowing background for the sky. If I wanted to go further, I could even use an image of clouds as my color in order to create this feeling that there's like an actual sky there. So to make this look more like the sun, I'm going to take this light source that's up higher here. I'm going to make it a lot brighter. because of course the sun is a lot brighter. I'm going to change the color a little bit and then set the brightness to a lot higher. And then maybe move it even further up in the sky. The sun really casts illumination over everything. So if you want something to look like it's the sun, it's best that the light source is, it's either far away or you use a directional light source. And you can see that as soon as I do that, it doesn't look like it's a local, like a street lamp or something, but it's really like covering the whole scene. And that will start to make it look more like the sun is in the sky. Now it looks a little bit more like daytime. I have a sky as a background, and I have a light source that is just coming from one direction like the sun would. And I can now change and really experiment with my material again and see if I can change the reflectivity of the car to make it like it would look like in the daytime. So I'm going to actually make it even more reflective, and it will really start to look like it's sitting outside. A car has a very nice, interesting balance between its paint color, that is the color of the paint, and how reflective it is. It's not 100% reflective, because if I do that, then it looks like a mirror, and it's not quite a mirror. So I pull down the reflectivity just a little bit because I have that underlying paint color. That will make it look a lot more realistic. That's it for this experiment in rendering and ray tracing. If I want to get if I want to get a really nice screen capture, what I will do is I will then kind of hide the attribute editor, like I mentioned before, just by clicking on it. And then I'll just wait a few seconds for it to converge to a nice quality image before I do a screen capture. Okay, so that's all for this video. I hope you've enjoyed this brief intermediate level tutorial on how to create more complex materials in Maya using Arnold for rendering. In future videos, I'll show how to create even more complicated surfaces, such as the kind of bumps that appear in concrete and other types of textures. That's it for now. See you next time.